Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're going to have a fun little battle between the Weatherby cartridges. We're going to be comparing 257 Weatherby to the 270 Weatherby and to the 7mm Weatherby. All of these have the exact same parent case. We're going to find out which one is the best Weatherby in this case size. Hope you enjoy the video. Back around 1943, Roy Weatherby had started making his famous Wildcat cartridges that we now know as the 257 Weatherby, the 270 Weatherby, the 7mm Weatherby, and of course the 300 Weatherby. Roy Weatherby based his cartridges off of two types, a standard length action and a magnum length action. So what we have here is a 300 Weatherby, that's a 257 Weatherby. They're both based off the 375 H&H, so that is the parent case, obviously necked up and down. Now the 257 Weatherby, the 270 Weatherby, and the 7mm Weatherby are all based off of this standard length action case. And the case capacity is very similar to a 7mm Rem Mag, maybe just a little bit more, but not quite as much as a 300 Winchester Magnum. Now, of the four of his original cartridges that I mentioned, his very first one that he created was the 270 Weatherby, which I thought was kind of interesting. And maybe I'm thinking of the times, you know, the 270 Winchester, that was probably its golden age, with Jack O'Connor using it a lot. And so he probably wanted to make a competitor to the 270 Winchester. And boy, did he do it, at least in velocity. Obviously, it smokes the 270 Winchester. Shortly after, Roy Weatherby created his favorite cartridge, the 257 Weatherby Magnum. It's one of my favorites. In fact, it has a nickname called the 257 Roy. And finally, Roy created the 7mm Weatherby Magnum. The 7 Weatherby was ahead of its time. It was about 18 years before the famous 7 Rem Mag came out. And the 7 Weatherby has a distinct advantage over the 7 Rem Mag. But a couple things have really just killed this cartridge. We'll go into that. But it's pretty underrated. Now, when we compare all three of these to each other, the 257, the 270 Weatherby, and the 7mm Weatherby, you know, at a glance, you could easily say, well, this is easy. Pick the one that's the most efficient, the one that shoots the heaviest bullets, maybe the most versatile, and, well, you're probably going to pick the 7 Weatherby. However, I think there's a bit more to it. There's some twist rate issues, availability as well. So let's get into it and see how all three of these compare to each other. I switched to the Nosler book because I feel like the Nosler book represents the velocities you can get with these Weatherby cartridges a little bit more accurately. Let's go to a 100 grain bullet. I feel like this is probably the most popular weight in 257, the 100 to 115. And Nosler says almost 3,600 feet per second. I personally shoot a 110 grain AccuBond right at around 35, so I'm a little bit faster in this, but this is pretty accurate where you're going to be in the high 3,400s feet per second. Talk about extreme flat shooting out to 400 yards. Now let's take a look at the 270 Weatherby. Let's see what Nosler says. Let's see here. So we have a bit more versatility in the weight. You're going to be looking at 100 grain up to 160-ish. 130 is obviously the most popular bullet weight in 270s, whether that's a 270 Win or a 270 Weatherby. And Nosler says 3476, which is smoking fast. Let's take a look at the 7 Weatherby. We're going to look at the 140 grain. In this video, we're going to use a 145 grain bullet, but Nosler says mid 3,300 feet per second. A lot of you, if you have a 7 Weatherby, would probably be shooting 150 or 160s, a 150 at almost 33, and then a 160 at almost 3,200. Very fast and pretty versatile, really. Now, one of the biggest reasons the 7 Weatherby is just not popular, it's almost a dead cartridge, you could say, is because in 1962, Remington came out with the 7mm Remington Magnum. One of the fun things about the Hornady book is that Your case dimensions in the book here are actually what it is in life as well. So you're looking at basically cases that are almost identical. They have almost identical case capacity, but funny enough, 7 Weatherby is usually about 100 to 150 feet per second faster than the 7mm Remington Magnum. So why is that the case? Well, for some reason, Remington made this to a SAMI chamber of around, I don't know, roughly 62,000 psi, while Weatherby made theirs to 65,000 psi. There's also a bit longer neck, so the bullet's not protruding into case capacity. Overall, the Weatherby takes advantage of its case capacity much better than the 7 Rem Mag, even though they basically have the exact same case. Now let's get on with comparison. But we're going to use the exact same bullet type. So we're going to use a Barnes LRX. For 257, we're using a 101 grain. For 270 Weatherby, we're going to be using a 129 grain LRX. And finally, for the 7mm Weatherby, we're going to be using a 145 grain LRX. To get a more accurate reading on what each of these cartridges can do, we're going to use GRT. All of them will have 26-inch barrels, which all of them come in 26-inch barrels. We're going to use that Barnes. Well, they don't have the 101, so we're going to use the 100 grain TTSX. We're going to use IMR 7828 SSC. And the top velocity, according to GRT, for a 257 Weatherby is a little over 3,600 feet per second, while staying around 65,000 psi. Up next, the 270 Weatherby. We are using a 129 grain LRX. Again, GRT doesn't have the LRX, so we're going to use a 130 TTSX. And, well, the best powder for this that I could find is IMR 7828 SSC. And what we're looking at is right at around 3,400, maybe just a hair under it if we want to stay at 65,000 psi. Now for the 7mm Weatherby Magnum, again, this one actually has the 145 LRX, so that's nice. We're going to use N565, and it says the top velocity is basically 3,350. So that's moving pretty darn good. Let's go ahead and look at some downrange ballistics for the 257, 270, and the 7mm Weatherby. Again, with these LRX bullets, at 3,625 feet per second, you have a muzzle energy of 2947. Let's go out to 400 yards. The bullet's still going plenty fast enough to expand, but your energy is around 1547 foot-pounds of energy. I know a lot of guys that swear by this for elk. I think it's a little small for my liking. I always want some added insurance. No doubt this thing can be effective. At 400, you have 3.91 MOA in drop, 2.48 in wind drift, and a 10 mile per hour wind. On to the 270 Weatherby with the 129 grain LRX, muzzle velocity of 3,400 feet per second. You have 3,312 foot-pounds of energy. As we go up in bullet diameter, it becomes a little more efficient in this case. At 400, we're going 2565 feet per second, 1,885 foot-pounds of energy. So 300 more foot-pounds of energy than the 257 Weatherby. But there is a little bit more drop, 4.39 MOA, and then 2.27 MOA wind adjustment. Let's just take this as far as we can to see where we hit 1,500 foot-pounds. This is actually 2,289 feet per second, and then we're right at 1,500 foot-pounds at 550 yards at sea level. So this has about 150 yard advantage over the 257 Weatherby. The 7mm Weatherby with a 145 grain LRX, muzzle velocity of 3,350. We have the most energy, 3,614 foot-pounds of energy, 300 more than the 270. At 400 yards, bullets going 2560, so just a hair slower than the 270 Weatherby. But we have, well, at least 200 more foot-pounds of energy. 4.49 MOA in drop, so it's basically almost dead even with the 270, and then almost about the exact same wind drift as well. Now we get out to 600 yards, the bullet's going 2213. I think that's about, you're hitting the max of where this bullet will properly expand, and you get 1,577 foot-pounds of energy at 600 yards. So where do I rank these three cartridges? Well, I know some of you 7mm Weatherby fans are going to be upset with this, but I'm going to have to put 7 Weatherby last. I know it's the most versatile. You can shoot the heaviest bullets, but the extremely slow twist rate, which is a 1 in 10, really hampers it. I mean, if it came with a 1 in 9 or a little faster, it would destroy the PRC and the 7mm Rem mag. It's also the hardest to find ammo wise and brass. Now, you can make a case. All of these have the exact same brass. You just have to neck up or neck down. But yeah, I'm going to have to put it last. Next, I'm going to have to do the 257 Weatherby as second. Look, guys, I love the 257 Weatherby. It's just not as versatile as the other two. It's definitely the flattest shooting and probably the most fun to shoot and has the least recoil. But the bullet selection is what kind of holds the 257 back. The 25 caliber is just not that popular right now. However, I think that's changing here soon with the 25 Creedmoor and hopefully maybe a 25 PRC. And at number 1, I think most underrated, one of the best Weatherby cartridges is the 270 Weatherby. You're going to have a little bit better selection of ammo than the 7mm Weatherby. You're going to have a bit more versatility than the 257. You're going to have more power than the 257, and it's almost up there with the 7 Weatherby in power. You're shooting decently high BC bullets, extremely fast and very flat shooting. I think the 270 Weatherby is very underrated, and yeah, I probably should get one of these days.